do it? Shh. It doesn't work? Shh. Good evening. I'm Fred Studeman. I have the great honor and privilege of being the chair of judges for this year's Baillie Gifford Prize. And we're now going to move into the final chapter, where you're going to, at the end of which you will learn which of these fantastic 6 books is the winner. And the way it's going to work is we're going to give you some presentations, both in the form of video, but also from all of us judges, we will speak to each book. You will notice an empty chair, because unfortunately the wonderful Andrea Wolf, who's treasured and loved by all of us, in keeping with her normal day job of being a biographer, among other things, a writer, but including a biographer of Humboldt, she is actually in Patagonia. So we're going to somehow channel Andrea, because she is not with us, but she will be present. And before we start, I'd like to just extend, because we've all had a lovely dinner, I think, and I hope, another word of thanks to the Blavatnik Family Foundation for making that all possible. So, we can roll the video.
This is not a story which denies trans identities, nor that argues trans people deserve to lead anything other than happy lives, free of harassment, with access to good health care. This is a story about the underlying safety of an NHS service, the adequacy of the care it provides, and its use of poorly evidenced treatments on some of the most vulnerable young people in society, and how so many people sat back, watched, and did nothing. I hope that this book is going to be a lasting record of what's happened in this area of healthcare. Really, I think I want people to learn moving forward how to better design gender services for children, but also I think there are lessons for the wider NHS here. It's a classic NHS story where concerned professionals raised concerns and they weren't listened to and they weren't acted upon anywhere near fast enough. And really, we owe it to this group of young people to create the very best services for them, both for those for whom a medical transition may well work and for those for whom it won't. I got to the point that I felt I couldn't not write this book. I knew so much about what had happened at GIDS, and I had managed, along with my colleague Deborah Cohen, to put so much information out into the public domain with the BBC, but there was so much more that I knew. And I felt I didn't want that in my head alone. It had to be shared because I felt there needed to be a lasting record of what had happened, and other people needed to know it, and other people outside of gender clinics needed to know it, so that we could have this calm, evidence-based conversation as a society.
Evening, everyone. I'm Andy Haldane. As we've heard, Time to Think is Hannah Barnes' absolutely brilliant and indeed courageous investigation into the Tavistock Centre's gender identity services. The book was turned down by 22 publishers prior to publication, and that means there are at least 22 people in the room this evening looking a bit sheepish. See if you can spot them on your table, a bit of audience participation. The book has gone on to become a bestseller, a compelling and cautionary tale of how the best intended individuals and institutions can, through pressures on resources and management failure, end up doing more harm than good, in this case to a great many young and vulnerable people. Time to Think, though, is much more than an expose of a medical scandal. It's a clarion call to action on why we need to strengthen across all of its services our current fragile and overburdened health system. So please join me in congratulating and giving Hannah a huge round of applause as she comes to the stage to accept her envelope. Hannah.
There were over 100 pictures in all, but one was missing, the painter told me, the very first portrait he had drawn as a child. He had liked his gentle teacher, so was shocked and shamed when it all erupted and he learned of his naivety. She was, they warned him, a class enemy, the daughter of a landlord. He steeled his heart and did the right thing, used his pen, pinned the hideous caricature to the blackboard, and still remembered, as if it were this morning, the moment she walked in and saw it, and how the blood drained from her face. She understood already what it might mean, what might follow. He was too young, but grew up fast. Soon he would see them burning pictures and breaking Buddhas, beating people with sticks and metal bars. Writing Red Memory took me right across China to speak to so many people who'd lived through the era, and people who've all chosen to keep that memory alive in some way, ranging from former Red Guards, people who were victims at the time, through to people who even impersonate some of the key figures of the era. And then beyond that, I went to some of the key sites, and of course, I drew on the wealth of scholarship that's now been done, often by Chinese scholars studying the era. The Cultural Revolution was just a decade of turbulence and trauma in many cases that has scarred many people in China so deeply. And yet there is this paradox that many people there still think of it quite fondly in some ways and have that element of nostalgia towards it. And it was really important to me to capture that as well.
So, from the earliest days of the judging process, there were a small number of books that pulled ahead of the rest, a bit like horses at the Grand National. Tania Branigan's Red Memory was one of those books. As judges, we read and reread and reread it, marveling each time at its artistry and great humanity. Tanya traces the afterlife of the Cultural Revolution, mapping the ways it is both remembered and forgotten in contemporary China. We were deeply impressed by the breadth of her research, by the many and various personal stories that she collected during her time as a reporter in China, and by the enormous skill with which she has woven those stories into a beautiful and haunting book. Please join us in congratulating Tanya as she collects her Shortlist Award.
They lay half naked on their wooden boards until women covered them in sprigs of greenery. Flowers were thrown down from the windows as they passed. A ragged little lad ran along with them sobbing. The corpse at the front, with a grey beard and a bullet hole in the forehead, had belonged to his father. The boy had stayed with the body in the hours since the fighting and still refused to be separated from it. With every step, the cortege grew in number. It's wonderful to be shortlisted for the Baillie Gifford Prize. First, because if you look at the shortlist, it's such a stunning group of writers, and I'm just very proud to be one of their number. And secondly, it's the fact that this prize is about writing. And I take writing very seriously, and I'm very happy to have been noticed in connection with a prize like this, which is about the quality of writing. I chose to write about this moment in Europe's history, partly because it is so European, and the Europeans of that moment, it seems to me, are more European than Europeans today. I mean, they have a completely joined up awareness of what they're doing. And the pulsing, mysterious heart of that century is the revolutions of 1848-49. And it seemed to me, the more and more I looked at them, I mean, when I was at school, I remember being told that they're complicated and a failure. And I remember thinking, what an unattractive combination that is. Who wants to work on a complicated failure? But on, reflecting on them in the last 10 or 20 years, I've realized that actually, although they certainly were complicated, they most certainly were not a failure, and they're deeply interesting. Everything human, the entire sort of apparatus of modern politics is in there. And a lot of things are coming to light for the first time that are now part of our present.
Revolutionary Spring is a magisterial account of the causes, the unfolding and consequences of the European revolutions of 1848. Too often dismissed as failures, almost as footnotes to much bigger moments in European history, Christopher Clark brilliantly reminds us just how extraordinary the events of 1848 were and their lasting impact. Revolutions swept across most of the continent in a development that profoundly shaped and reshaped modern European history and then reverberated throughout the world. Beautifully written, with great sensitivity to the lives caught up in social and political upheaval, this is a powerful book that expertly and elegantly masters both the intimate details of daily life and the bigger picture of a continent in the grip of multiple, conflicting movements and tides driven by industrialization, the collapse of the old order, and radical new ideas about how society should be organized. Revolutionary Spring is an exemplary work of history, but it's also one that holds many insights and lessons for readers today. Please join me in congratulating Christopher Clark as he comes up to receive his Shortlist prize.
Through a performer's rendering of notes set down on a page decades or centuries ago, we listen to moments of lost time, summoning from the ether glimmers of what another era has written, heard, dreamed, hoped, and mourned. The music may also recall visions of a more fair and just world that remain no less vital today for having not yet come to pass. The philosopher Ernst Bloch called this hope-filled state of potentiality das noch nicht sein, the condition of not yet being. I have attempted here in this book to capture some of the myriad ways in which music carries forward the noch nicht sein of the past, the still glowing embers of possibility, the buried visions of alternative futures. The book invites readers to really entirely rethink their own relationship to music as an art form and what it's capable of carrying forward from the past. It's not just we who remember music, the book suggests, it's also music that remembers us, music that crystallizes these wordless truths from these distant eras and is capable of carrying them forward. On the one hand, it is a book of history and memory, it is a cultural history of musical memorials, but it's also a book more fundamentally about reimagining the power and presence of art in our lives today. The German poet Friedrich Schlegel famously said that a historian is a prophet looking backwards. This book suggests that perhaps a memorialist could be a historian angled toward the future. Being recognized by the Baillie Gifford Prize was really a thrill for me. Time's Echo took 10 years of my life to create and really drew on all of my capacities as a writer, as a researcher, as a scholar, and as a historian.
Jeremy Eichler's Time's Echo is a book about music as a repository of cultural memory, war trauma, and an expression of resistance. It reveals deep and dazzling insights into its subject matter. We as the judging panel defy anyone, those who love classical music, those who have zero interest, not to be held in its grip. It's a book about the past, about history, yet it couldn't be more pertinent to the present moment in which the world is once again riven by violence, once again with civilians as the collateral damage of war. We were stunned by its profundity, its masterful structure, its beautiful, shimmering sentences. It's evidently a life's work, a labor of love, and a testimony to the pain of war. It has an utterly unique voice, and it warrants being classed as a masterpiece of non-fiction writing. So please join me in congratulating Jeremy Eichler. Can I invite you to the stage?
But really, it was all something of a secret, how Balanchine made his extraordinary dances, and how the New York City Ballet had come to be. Nobody quite knew, and nobody could quite say. There was something urgent in the secrecy, and Balanchine built walls around his gift and walls around his company, as if there was some kind of magic spell that might be broken by exposure. By the time he died, the company was not just a company, it was a kind of secret society, utopian community with its own elaborate rules and rituals, and they were all members, monks and angels, mute scribes and devotees of Balanchine's art. This is a love story in all senses, in the sense of emotion and romance, in the sense of art, and also in the experience of the 20th century. Mr. B's story reveals the extraordinary importance of the human body and the ways in which that body changed in the course of war and revolution and exile and epidemics. Really the fragility of the human body. George Balanchine was the biggest influence in my life and among the greatest choreographers. His life story had not been told, and the story of his art had not been told. I found that I couldn't get away from it in a way. I finally decided that I would have to tackle it head on and discover why this man was so important in both my life and in the history of 20th century art.
Dance, I think, is the hardest of all the arts to write about. To evoke something so physical, so visual, so abstract in words is really a tall order. But that's what Jennifer Homans has managed to do in writing Mr. B, her biography of the choreographer George Balanchine, who was part of that wave of artists exiled from Soviet Russia. You'll know Nabokov and Stravinsky, but Balanchine is the one you quite possibly haven't heard of, and you really should find out more about him by reading this book. He took the high modernism of old Europe and planted it deep inside American popular culture, and it's this fusion of ballet and Broadway that seems to jump off the page in these elegant and beautiful and rhythmic sentences, not unlike ballet itself. But Mr. B isn't just about art, it's a portrait of the whole 20th century of communism, fascism, and migration not just of individuals, but of a whole culture. Now, Jennifer isn't with us for personal reasons, very sadly, but accepting on her behalf is her editor, Laura Barber.
As it blackened and flattened block after block, the fire was imposing on this highly ordered Type A city a kind of nihilistic anarchy that flouted every value its citizens, companies, and churches held dear. Down with everything. Burn it all. Go back where you came from. Binge and purge. In the face of this surreal undoing, the efforts of its industrious and prosperous inhabitants now appeared futile. This was a city of doers, but now the only thing to do was run away with their children and whatever they could carry. It was frightening, and it was also humiliating. As they fled down the highway in the heart-pounding slow motion one encounters in nightmares, scenes of destruction and defeat confronted them on every hand. Fire Weather explores our tangled relationship with fire through time, and specifically through the petroleum industry, which is, in essence, a fire industry. What I've done is build the book around a blow-by-blow, street-by-street account of the 2016 mega fire that devastated the petroleum hub of Fort McMurray, Alberta, causing the largest single-day evacuation in the history of modern fire. It was clear to me when the city of Fort McMurray, Alberta caught on fire in 2016 that this was a glimpse of the future. It wasn't just an aberration. And the fact that it burned with the intensity as it did in the subarctic of Canada indicated to me that if it could happen there, it could happen anywhere, and we better pay attention.
You might ask, why would I want to read a book about a wildfire that happened in 2016 in the middle of Canada? Well, I promise you, trust me, you really want to. Fire Weather completely surprised us. We absolutely loved it. It reads like a thriller. It's a page-turner. I could not put it down. On the one hand, it's an almost minute-by-minute account how this fire unfolded, how it raced first towards and then through Fort McMurray, which is a mining town at the center of Canada's fossil oil industry. 100,000 people had to evacuate. And John Vaillant describes how houses were no longer homes, but fuel for the ravenous fire, how vehicles became bombs. On the other hand, this is a book that tells a much, much bigger story also, a story of a hotter world, as John calls it in its subtitle, a changing world, a world that is influenced, that is changing by human-induced climate change. He describes how humankind has systematically destroyed our magnificent planet, how we have ignored and still are ignoring the warnings. So this is an important book, serious in its focus, but utterly compelling in its narrative pace, and it's beautifully written.
I'd like to ask John Vaillant to come forward to... So, now we advance towards the grand finale. First, I think we should probably do one more round of applause for all the shortlistees, because you are all wonderful. And I'd like to actually start with a few small words of thanks, beginning with the team here at the Science Museum, all of you, from people who made the dinner possible, but the technicians and everyone. It's always a wonderful and memorable occasion, and you've surpassed yourselves. Thank you. Thanks also to the folks at FOR, led by Truda and her team, but in particular Ella, who kept us organized and honest. while sitting through hours of wrangling back and forth that we put her through. And of course, thanks to Toby Mundy for placing his trust and the trust of the prize in us as a judging panel. Since we first convened in a, I don't know how honest I can be, in an elegant office block in Whitechapel, back in the sunny days of June, one of the recurring questions that we were faced with, questions we asked ourselves, questions that others asked us, was how did you go about selecting the books? What were the criteria? What was the process? What were you looking for? Well, I can reveal this prize, because I'm now about to exit it, comes with a light touch approach to rules. So we kind of had to work it out ourselves a bit. But the criteria beyond looking for an exceptional piece of literary nonfiction, we wanted to look at the choice of subject. We wanted to look at the quality of execution, the originality, but also relevance. And that was a very critical category for us. But also to never forget form and style and different genres, be open to everything. So our first meeting was a bit like browsing in a bookshop. I think you'll all have that experience, just hundreds of titles lined up, and we walked up and down, dipped in and out, sat down, stood up, sampled pages, chatted. I think you'll all recognize that sensation. We were a bit like kids in a sweet shop. It was wonderful. But one immediate impression that came to us was the sheer range and quality of nonfiction being published today across all genres. And it really pleases me, because I'm afraid to say that sometimes one can move in the books world and just encounter endless dreary pessimism and moaning and groaning and everything's getting worse. And I can say this, there is of course a German word for this. It's Kulturpessimismus, and we should banish it. Yeah, you can see patterns and trends, and maybe not everything is totally original, but you get the hot take response to world events, the steady stream of meditations on the healing power of nature, the darkest moments of history. AI is not just coming for you, it's already arrived, and I think our successor panels will probably have to contend more than that. I think we got away with one or two texts that were literally written by a machine. But actually, one of the great experiences of judging, and I think it's been alluded to earlier this evening, is encountering the unfamiliar, being forced to engage with the unexpected. And boy, we certainly had that. I think we all came away reminded about just what an amazing number of good books there are out there. And judging took each of us to places I think we never anticipated. I certainly felt that. I think my fellow judges will agree. And you can see that reflected in this shortlist that you've just seen presented, every one of which is a great book. And I'd urge you, if you haven't already, to read each and every one of them. You will not regret it. Many people also asked whether we argued, whether there were spats. Andrea's absence is nothing to do with the fact that there may have been the odd disagreement. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint you on that one. Because over the past half year, a disparate bunch of wonderful individuals, well, excluding myself, have came together in what one of the team described rightly as a glorious high-end book club, fueled by friendly, informed, intense discussions. I'll miss that. And I want to thank all of you guys, as well as the judging panel, for being there. It's been wonderful. Thank you. Doesn't mean that we didn't have our moments. There was the odd standoff between the humanities and the social sciences. Guess where that came from? History came in for a fair bit of skeptical scrutiny, and who knew that bullet points could prove so contentious? Anyway, judging is a journey, and it comes with its various staging posts, in our case, the short list, the long list. But after 100 or so books, we've now come to the end of our journey and the final destination. In this prize, there can and will only be one winner. Others may choose to do other things, but we don't. And for us, the decision was unanimous. The book that ultimately stood out was a work of authoritative, meticulously researched, beautifully executed writing that moved expertly and confidently from the very immediate, the human, to the global and the philosophical, taking in numerous disciplines along the way to produce a story that is highly relevant for our times. A book that, in searching for the answers to pressing questions, left us as readers coming away inspired to question our own behaviors. And this is the big show and tell. The winner is Fire Weather by John Vaillant. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. I am deeply moved, and imagine for a moment my surprise. I've been here about 2.5 hours, just got off a plane from New York with my dear wife, Nora, who's been shepherding me and being just a wonderful support through all this. This is really nerve-wracking for writers, you know, and I really feel for, if the other five feel the way I have, you know, you can't help but be on edge, and you're excited. And hearing the descriptions of the other books, I want to read them all, and I thought, that's the winner. No, that's the winner. No, that's the one. And you're reading the tea leaves of the descriptions, and you're feeling your own excitement and interest as the writers describe what they've done, and then their advocates advocate for them, and they're all really compelling. So this is, I have some awareness of the jury already, and I can't tell you what an honor it is to be read by you and to have you experience it that way. Andrea Wolf's The Man Who The Invention of Nature really blew my mind when I read it, and I was both in awe and also deeply jealous of what she had accomplished with that book. It's really amazing. So it's really potent to be in this company. And one thing I wanted to say, as someone coming from Western Canada, raised in North America, to come back here in a way that, you know, a lot of you may take it for granted, but this is the home of my mother tongue. And I think for all of us who wrote these books, I'm assuming we were writing in our first language. And it's really potent to be in the birthplace of that incredibly beautiful, powerful, generative, infinitely expanding medium. And so to be in a room full of people who are steeped in it, versed in it, love it, celebrate it, and are willing to read books more than once is really beautiful and rare. And so I was thinking about labors of love, and I think the act, you know, I could tell just by the way people spoke about their own work there, that they loved what they did, that they loved their subject, that they loved the act of engaging with this language and what it can do. And what I moved into from there was that labor of love, of writing, of telling that story, of fleshing out and making real again these stories that might otherwise be lost. So right there you have two labors of love. I think reading in a way is its own labor of love. And I think again what the jurors, what the jury has done is really a labor of love. You know, to really go as writers yourself of considerable accomplishment, to then work over in this tender way, almost a grooming way, as in, and I'm thinking of the way apes care for each other, you know, kind of tangled up in each other and kind of going through every knit, and it's a kind of appreciation and contact, and you know, this could all be going really horribly off the rails, but I mean it. I really mean it sincerely. Yeah, no, jet lag is no excuse. So, but it's just the quality of attention, and a good, you know, the writer knows that from a good editor, and also their publicist and agents too. You know, they're all attending to detail, but I feel like what you're doing, you're kind of going over the commas and the syllables, and then that incredibly difficult task of weighing, and I do not envy you the choices you obviously made, and I feel honestly totally conflicted. I'm really happy and really proud to be in this group, but to be singled out is, you know, it's really exhilarating, but it creates a whole new set of complications, and I kind of, it's sort of like I want to go back to when it was just 6 of us all together, you know, and it was all potential. And now we've kind of crossed over into this other place, and, you know, that sort of tests me and everything else. And, but suffice to say that I'm really, really, really proud to be back in the land of my mother tongue, and to be honored in this way, to be seen in this way, and above all, to be read. Really, I mean, it really touches me so deeply. And I know that that's true for the other writers in this room and the other writers in this really amazing cohort. I mean, the variety is, I want to read them all. And you all did. So, so, thank you very much, and